Night had already swallowed what remained of the abandoned theme park when the three urban explorers, Liam, Nora, and Jacob, slipped through the bent iron gate that hung loosely from one hinge, squealing like something alive as the wind pushed it toward them, and their flashlights cut across cracked pavement overtaken by thick, tangled weeds that swayed as if whispering warnings from beneath the soil. The air smelled like rust, mud, and something strangely sweet, like candy left to rot for years. And though they joked earlier about how cliché haunted theme parks were, the closer they walked toward the main plaza, the quieter they became, because the place felt wrong. Deeply wrong, as if time had been forced to stop here. The mascot statue, or what was left of it, stood on a platform with its arms open, chunks of plaster missing from its face, so its smile twisted into a skeletal grin that made Nora shiver and mutter that it looked like it was waiting for someone. And Jacob, always the braver one, lifted his camera to film an introduction for their channel. But the moment he pressed record, the air vibrated with a sharp metallic hum, as if some unseen machinery deep within the park had turned on for the first time in decades, making the three of them freeze and glance at each other, silently asking if they all heard it. Then, without warning, the Ferris wheel behind them groaned loudly, one enormous rusted cart swinging back and forth, though there was no wind now. And Liam whispered that maybe they shouldn't be here. But before he could finish his sentence, the loudspeaker system crackled to life overhead, releasing a distorted burst of carnival music that slowed and warped like a record melting under fire, every note dripping with something malicious. And as the lights on the old carousel flickered weakly, first yellow, then orange, then a deep, sickly red, Nora grabbed Liam's arm hard enough to hurt and whispered in a trembling voice that someone else was here, someone who wanted them to enter deeper, because the music wasn't random. It was an invitation. The three of them followed the warped carnival music deeper into the park, each step crunching over broken popcorn tubs and shredded plush toys whose button eyes seemed to glisten in the dark. And though their flashlights barely pushed back the thick blanket of shadows, the music kept guiding them until it abruptly cut off right as they reached the entrance to the funhouse. Its fading paint peeling in long strips like old skin. The cartoonish faces on the exterior melted into grotesque expressions that made Jacob mutter that maybe this place had decayed far more recently than 30 years, because everything looked wrong in a way time alone couldn't explain. Nora pointed out that the funhouse door was slightly open, not blown inward like the rest of the structures, but neatly ajar, as if someone had stepped inside moments earlier. And after a hushed argument about whether going in was worth the footage, Jacob insisted their channel needed something big, and pushed the door with his shoulder, causing it to creak open with a long, drawn-out moan that echoed through a maze of shifting mirrors and rotted wooden planks, the air inside thick with dust that tasted strangely metallic, as though they had walked into the lungs of a dying beast. Their reflections twisted unnaturally in the cracked mirrors. Liam's face stretched vertically, Nora's smile warped into something far too wide, Jacob's reflection staring back at him even when he looked away. And as they ventured deeper, the floor dipped under their feet like soft flesh rather than wood, making all three of them freeze until Jacob's camera captured something that made his breath hitch. In one mirror, behind them, stood a fourth figure, small, hunched, its face blurred except for a wide, dripping grin. But when they turned around, nothing was there except the darkness breathing quietly between the mirror-lined walls. Nora whispered that they should leave, her voice shaking as the mirrors began to fog from the inside, as though something was exhaling from behind the glass. And then, from the far end of the corridor, the mirrors began to rattle violently, one by one, as if something was sprinting toward them from the other side of the reflections. And without thinking, the three of them ran deeper into the funhouse, desperate to escape the sound of whatever was chasing them through the mirrors, like an animal finally released from a long, hungry confinement. Bursting out of the funhouse and into the open air, Jacob, Nora, and Liam didn't stop running until the distorted laughter echoing behind them finally faded, replaced by an eerie stillness that made the empty theme park feel even more alive, as if it were holding its breath. They slowed only when they reached the old carousel, its once vibrant pastel horses now blistered by sun and rain, their wooden bodies split open to reveal rusted metal ribs. But yet, despite the shattered lights and the sagging canopy, the entire ride was turning in a slow, deliberate rotation powered by no electricity they could see, the horses moving up and down in stiff, jerking motions like puppets pulled by an invisible hand. Jacob swore under his breath as he filmed, circling the ride to capture every unnatural detail, while Nora pointed out that the control box near the booth was missing its cables entirely, ripped clean from the ground as though by claws rather than tools. and Liam, voice trembling, asked if they all saw what he saw. One horse, positioned near the back, was not wooden at all, but pale-skinned, its mane long strands of matted black hair, its glass eyes wide and full of an intelligence that made Nora stumble backward, covering her mouth as Jacob whispered that maybe it was taxidermy or some kind of failed attraction. But his voice lacked conviction because the creature's sides moved with shallow, barely there breaths, and a thin line of fresh blood trickled from the corner of its mouth, smeared across its teeth in a way that suggested it had bitten something or someone recently. Then the carousel abruptly sped up, the machinery groaning like bones grinding against each other, flinging dust and flakes of paint into the air as the horses began rising and falling too fast for any human rider to survive. And in the stuttering blur of motion, the pale horse slowly turned its head toward them, its jaw opening wider, far wider than human anatomy should allow, revealing a dark, hollow throat that pulsed as if something inside was trying to crawl up and out. Jacob shouted for everyone to run, but just as they turned, the carousel lights, dead for decades, blazed to life in a blinding spiral of red bulbs, and a child's laughter, soft but unmistakably close, whispered from the ride, "Don't leave. It's my turn now," causing all three explorers to break into a sprint toward the deeper, more forbidden part of the park, where even the wind seemed too afraid to blow.
Dashing deeper into the decaying heart of the park, Jacob, Nora, and Liam found themselves stumbling into what had once been the Grand Parade route, the wide pathway now cracked and split like shattered glass beneath their feet, with toppled lampposts bending inward as though bowing toward a long-forgotten spectacle. The air felt heavier here, thick with the smell of rust and old rain, and lining the route on both sides were the abandoned parade floats, massive structures that once carried cheerful characters through crowds of cheering families, now reduced to grotesque skeletons of twisted steel and rotting foam, where smiling mascots had melted into drooping, nightmarish masks streaked with grime, their cartoon eyes warped into hollow pits that seemed to follow the explorer's every move. Jacob's flashlight swept across one float shaped like an oversized clown head, its enormous painted grin sagging and split at the corners as if it had been carved open from the inside, and Nora grabbed his arm, whispering that she heard something moving beneath the papier-mâché shell, a soft shuffling, followed by the quiet thud of something dragging itself along. Before Jacob could respond, Liam pointed ahead with a trembling hand because another float, designed as a fairy tale castle, was slowly sliding across the pavement despite having no wheels attached anymore, its base scraping harshly against the ground as if pushed by a dozen unseen hands. Panic tightening their throats, the group moved cautiously forward, hoping to skirt around it, but a sudden metallic groan erupted from above as the oversized animatronic dragon perched on the castle roof lurched its head downward, servos whining despite years of decay, its jaw snapping shut just inches from Nora's shoulder, with enough force to send rusted teeth scattering across the pavement. The floats around them began to shift. First, the pirate ship swaying as though rocked by invisible waves, then the cartoon animal float rising on stiff, jolting legs like a corpse remembering how to walk, until all of them, dozens of broken attractions, began inching into the parade route, blocking every exit with their monstrous, puppet-like movements, forming a claustrophobic corridor that funneled the explorers toward the only path left. The massive, faded archway at the far end labeled "Main Stage Show, No Entry," flickering with a single dying bulb that buzzed like a trapped insect. Realizing they had no choice, Jacob urged the others forward as whispers, childlike, giggling, and too close, began drifting from inside the hollow mascots, urging them on as though the entire park itself wanted to watch what they would do next. Pushed by the shifting wall of decayed parade floats behind them, Jacob, Nora, and Liam crossed beneath the Main Stage Show, No Entry archway, their footsteps echoing across the cracked concrete as they entered the vast open-air amphitheater where thousands once sat beneath summer fireworks. But now, the empty tiered seats curved around them like a colossal stone jaw, ready to snap shut. The stage itself loomed ahead, its curtain, once bright red, now a shredded tapestry dangling in strips that fluttered without wind, as though something behind them were breathing slowly, deliberately, waiting for an audience to come closer. Jacob raised his flashlight and immediately froze when he spotted shapes sitting in the front row. Mannequins, dozens of them, all slumped forward with their plastic hands clasped neatly in their laps, their eyeless faces pointed toward the stage in rigid, unnerving devotion. But as he stepped closer, he realized these weren't mannequins. These were the theme park's old mascot costumes, propped up as though still worn by performers, their once plush fur now matted, torn and stiff with rain and age, their neck openings slumped forward like the throats of empty corpses. A soft rustling reached them from behind the curtain, followed by a low mechanical hum, like an ancient generator struggling to wake from the dead. And then the stage lights, long dead for 20 years, flickered on in a sudden burst of buzzing electricity, bathing the entire amphitheater in harsh yellow light that made every shadow stretch and twitch as though alive. The curtain began to rise, not smoothly but in violent jerking spasms, and as each section lifted, Jacob, Nora, and Liam felt their stomachs twist because behind it stood every animatronic character the park ever had, lined up in a perfect semicircle, their joints creaking and sparking as they twitched like broken marionettes awaiting orders. The cowboy robot's jaw hung sideways, clicking as it tried to simulate speech, while the princess automaton leaned forward with a grinding shriek as her glassy eyes rotated in opposite directions, and the pirate captain's rusted hook scraped loudly against the floor as though sharpening itself for something yet unseen. Then, from above, a cracked speaker burst to life with a warped, muffled voice, the park founder's pre-recorded stage welcome, looping distorted phrases that blended into a single nightmare chant. Stay, stay, stay. The animatronics lurched forward in unison, stepping off the stage with heavy, unbalanced thuds that sent dust pluming into the air, and the mascots in the front row rose from their seats as though pulled upward by invisible strings. Panic ripping through their throats, the explorers sprinted toward the far exit ramp, the whole amphitheater trembling as dozens of broken characters gave chase, some dragging themselves with only arms, others limping on half-attached legs, all of them unified by the same glitching, sickly chant from the overhead speakers. Stay, stay, stay. As if the park had awakened not just to be explored, but to reclaim any living soul foolish enough to step inside. Bursting out of the amphitheater, Jacob, Nora, and Liam sprinted down a sloping maintenance path choked with weeds so tall they brushed their knees like hands trying to pull them back, the ground vibrating beneath their feet as the mechanical horde behind them spilled from the stage in a chaotic metallic stampede, their warped joints shrieking like tortured animals. The explorers stumbled into a clearing dominated by the park's power hub, a circular, windowless concrete structure known on old maps as the Central Operations Core. Once used to run every light, ride, and speaker in the entire complex, but now humming with a strange, unnatural rhythm, the low drone rising and falling like a heartbeat buried deep inside the walls. Liam, breathless and terrified, pointed out that the building shouldn't have power, not after 20 years of abandonment, yet electric cables snaked across the ground like black vines feeding into the structure's exterior, pulsing faintly with a dull red glow, as if something alive were crawling through them. Nora urged that they couldn't just keep running blindly, so Jacob opened the heavy service door, and a wave of hot, stale air washed over them, carrying the smell of burned plastic and something else, like old blood. Inside, the pitch-black hallway swallowed their flashlight beams, revealing peeling warning decals, overturned tool carts, and scattered pages of maintenance logs, all stamped with frantic handwritten messages across the margins reading, "It woke up, don't feed it, and shut it down before it learns." As they advanced deeper, the hum grew louder, vibrating through the floor like a distant engine revving from the dead. And then in the control chamber at the center, they found the source. The main power console, scorched and melted in places, yet somehow still operating, its screens flickering with corrupted images, smiling families entering the park, performers waving and parade floats colliding down the route. But as the footage looped, the faces of the visitors slowly decayed, their smiles stretching too wide, their eyes hollowing out, and their heads twitching unnaturally like the park itself was rewriting the memories it fed on. Suddenly, the screen changed to the live feed from the amphitheater, the animatronics and mascot suits crawling up the exit ramp toward the maintenance path, and then shifted again to the hallway they had just walked through, showing 3 human silhouettes standing exactly where they were. But in the footage, the silhouettes were turning slowly toward the camera, even though the explorers themselves were standing still. The heartbeat like pulsing intensified, and the power console began printing out paper from the old receipt-style printer, the thin strips curling onto the floor with each new line, repeating the same command over and over. Stay. The door slammed shut behind them with a thunderous metallic clank, and vents along the ceiling opened with a hiss as the light shifted to a deep red, bathing the room in a blood-like glow while the walls themselves began to move. Not mechanically, but organically, expanding and contracting in rhythmic pulses that matched the hum. Realizing the entire power core was alive, using the machinery like a skeleton and the park like a body, Jacob grabbed Nora and Liam and bolted toward the emergency ladder at the far end of the chamber. Climbing into the vertical escape shaft just as thick cables ripped free from the walls like tentacles, snapping and thrashing in pursuit. The three scrambled upward while the humming turned into a roar, and below them the power core growthed, its cables reaching, its lights flashing erratically, as if the entire park, the attractions, the mascots, the animatronics were extensions of a single, monstrous organism that wasn't finished hunting yet.
Jacob, Nora, and Liam climbed until their arms burned, pushing through the rusted hatch at the top of the escape shaft, only to emerge inside the highest point of the park, the abandoned clock tower overlooking the entire decaying sprawl, its massive gears frozen in place and its shattered clock face offering a jagged view of the grounds below, where the parade floats had formed a perfect ring, shifting and rolling into a strange circular formation, as if performing a ritual they had long been programmed to forget. From this vantage point, they saw the amphitheater animatronics spreading out across the park like hunting dogs, their jerky silhouettes weaving through old concession stands, shattered game booths, and toppled character statues, as the speakers throughout the grounds crackled to life, chanting the same glitching word over and over, "Stay, stay, stay," the sound echoing like a diseased heartbeat across the empty night. Liam pointed to the maintenance yard far beyond a roller coaster skeletons, shouting that they could outrun the machines if they could reach the forest beyond the back fence. But as they started down the tower stairwell, the steps themselves shook violently, dust pluming upward as a booming crash thundered through the park. The power core had erupted, sending a geyser of shattered concrete and tangled cables spearing into the sky like veins torn free from flesh. The entire living organism of the park screaming through its speakers as every animatronic, mascot suit, and twisted parade float turned simultaneously toward the tower. Nora cried that they had to move faster, and the three sprinted downward just as one of the animatronic mascots leapt onto the staircase from below, its rotted foam head lolling sideways as its metal fingers scraped across the railings like nails across bone. Jacob kicked it back and the creature tumbled into the depths, crashing through the broken steps in a rain of rust and fur. Bursting out of the tower's base, the explorers tore across the cracked pavement toward the maintenance yard, the ground trembling behind them as the machines converged, their collective weight shaking the earth like a stampede. The back fence came into view, bent but climbable, and Liam scrambled up first, hauling Nora after him as Jacob pushed from below. But before he could pull himself over, a cable whipped from the ground like a serpent, coiling around his ankle and dragging him backward across the dirt as Nora screamed his name. Acting on pure adrenaline, Jacob ripped free by slicing the cable with a jagged metal shard from the fence, stumbling into the forest as the park's monstrous voice roared through every speaker one final time, louder and more furious than ever. "Stay." The machines piled against the fence but would not cross it, their bodies glitching violently as though something bound them within the property lines, their hollow eyes staring into the trees long after the explorers had vanished into the darkness. And as Jacob, Nora, and Liam collapsed beneath the cover of the pines, gasping and trembling, the lights across the abandoned park flickered once more before dying completely, leaving the entire monstrous place dormant again, waiting, listening, hungry for the next soul who dared step inside. If there's one thing urban explorers learned the hard way, it's that not every abandoned place is empty. Some are simply waiting to wake up. That theme park in the middle of nowhere remains silent tonight, a sleeping beast beneath peeling paint and broken lights, its rides frozen, its mascots slumped in eternal smiles. But if you stand close enough to the fence, you might hear the speakers crackle, just for a second, whispering that same glitching word Jacob, Nora, and Liam will never forget. Stay. And if you're brave, or foolish, enough to cross the threshold, the park will welcome you the same way it welcomed them. Because places like that don't die. They just wait for their next visitor.